Gracious God, we give you thanks for gathering us again and again. We give you thanks for gathering us as your resurrection community, and as the hymn proclaims, Easter's work is not yet done. So we pray, O Lord, that these holy words of this story of new life will plant the seeds of hope within us. And that this morning, whatever meditations that we have in our hearts and minds, and the words that we share will always be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Well, the gospel story that I shared with you this morning, and one that I pray continues to inspire you as resurrection people, really tells us very little about the resurrection of Jesus, doesn't it? It's more about story of those who gathered with Jesus as his disciples. Those people who traveled with Jesus to small villages, to lake shores. It's a story about people who dared to change their lives, to put down their nets, to be different, to find a new family in Christ. What we're told, though, about this story is that there was one woman, Mary Magdalene. We don't know a lot about Mary. There's great biblical speculation about who she was and where she was from and how she lived her life. But when I look at this story, I like to look through the eyes of Mary, and I imagine that she got up that morning, if she slept at all, it was probably very little time. She was brave enough to get up before the sun came up. And she wanted to get back to the place where her good friend, her rabbi, her teacher, was buried just a few hours before. We're told that when she got there, that there was this tomb with the stone rolled away. The entrance was open. Mary Magdalene couldn't believe her eyes, and she ran back, probably still dark, stumbling on rocks and whatever she found in her way, but she had to get back to Simon Peter and the other disciple who was very much loved by Jesus. She probably woke them up or stirred them up and said, "You know what I've seen? I went back to where Jesus was buried, and I don't know what happened. That huge rock, that stone that blocked the entranceway of the tomb, it was rolled away." Simon Peter and the other disciple, they wondered what happened too, and they ran back, and it was like a race, and one got there before the other, and Mary not far behind. And they got to that tomb, and they looked inside, and they were puzzled. Well, how could such a thing happen? Nothing that Jesus had told them in the past was coming to mind about his death and resurrection. They just looked into the darkness of that tomb where death, they so thought, resided. The disciples returned home after seeing that empty tomb. But still, the gospel tells us they did not quite understand what happened. The full picture that God had revealed to them in Jesus had not yet been crystallized in their mind. But Mary, on the other hand, she stayed by the tomb. Her heart was so heavy, and she didn't have the energy, I imagine, just to find a way back to where the disciples were staying. She wanted to stay by that tomb. She felt so probably helpless because she was not able to finally treat the body of Jesus with all the love and care that she wanted to for his final resting. And so she dared to look inside that tomb one more time. And what did she see? But she saw two signs of God. Two angels that were positioned right there. And they had a question for Mary. They wanted to know something about her. They wanted to know a little bit about her experience with Jesus. Although they didn't go into specific questions, but they said, "Why are you weeping? Why are you weeping, Mary?" You know, Jesus asked that same question, didn't he? Mary tried to find a way to answer to those angels, probably stunned by the appearance of them. Before she could even turn around and stand up, Jesus was standing there with her, asking that very same question. Mary, why are you weeping? Why are you crying? Why are those tears of sorrows rolling down your cheeks? Mary still could not see Jesus, even though she could turn around and see the Jesus that she knew and loved. She imagined him to be not alive, but only the gardener. And she said, tell me if you've taken him someplace else, if this was not the place for him to be buried, and you moved him someplace else, please tell me where he is and I'll take care of him. She was so immersed in the sorrow of the death of Jesus. She just wanted to fulfill her obligations as a friend and tradition to take care of the body of Jesus. And she turns and she does not see him. And then Jesus calls her by name. Renewing that loving relationship, all he had to do is say, Mary. And immediately she's born anew. She heard the word of the Lord. And she's transformed into that person who remembers all. And she turns and says, Rabboni, teacher. And she reaches for him. But still, Jesus is not ready to be embraced as the risen one. And tells Mary what must take place, what God's plans are, and this continued unfolding of the story of salvation, that his ascension must take place. But Mary, I'm going to your God, my Father, your Father. The reuniting. And you, Mary, you must go back and you must carry out the task of sharing this resurrection news. You must wipe away the tears and take on the joy of hearing from me that God's project of salvation will continue. But you, Mary, you must go and take the word. And she does that. She runs back, Simon Peter and to the others, and she tells them, I have seen the Lord. I have seen the Lord, and this is what he said to me. And the story goes on. And the story continues. And the story is ours to hold fast to this day. It's the heart of the gospel story, you see. It's the heart of the gospel story. It's the story of one disciple seeing the risen Lord and taking off to report the good news, the resurrection news. The resurrection news is that she saw the risen Jesus and he gave her a message. The resurrection news is that you too can see the risen Lord and he does have a message for you. And the message is that you need to go out into the world and find other disciples and tell them what you have seen. Because if you don't do that, you're holding something to yourself. And see, God's plan is not for us to be selfish, but self-giving. And so the resurrection news is something that we share in word, in deed, in presence. Not presence as in gifts, but holy presence as we go. And yes, this resurrection news begins with one woman's resurrection vision. Thanks be to God to Mary Magdalene, that she had that resurrection vision. You know what a resurrection vision does? It transforms lives and people and places. Without a resurrection vision, this world would be hurting more than it already hurts. Without a resurrection vision, there wouldn't be the healing powers that God blesses us with to minister to the world with. You gotta have a resurrection vision. It goes right with the resurrection news. You hear it, you see it, you gotta have both to be part of the resurrection community. And so, thanks be to God for Mary's courage and faith. Because from that moment that Mary did not see the Jesus that she was hoping to see, that very moment she was captured by the powers of death, they were blinders on her eyes. They were blinders on the eyes of her heart. She couldn't see beyond death. But when Jesus spoke to her, called her by name, all of a sudden those blinders fell off to the sides, and she gained her resurrection vision, and she could see the world in a new way. Not through the lens of death, but through the lens of life. And so, life did not end with Jesus at the cross, but life continued as it flew out of that empty tomb. Life with Jesus meant a life renewed by the saving promise of God, that death will not have the last word. If you remember anything from my preaching this morning, I pray that you will remember this, that death will not have the last word. Say it with me. Death will not have the last word. Amen. That's the only thing you need to remember. Because God sent Christ into the world to reveal to us that death would not have the last word, that Christ has risen. Christ has risen indeed. Episcopal Bishop and theologian John Shelby says this, and this is something that we ought to remember, that our God is a God of life, and our God is a God of the resurrection. And Bishop Shelby Strong says, the action of resurrection belongs to God, not Jesus. Jesus was the vehicle of God's mighty power of resurrection, of new life. And that God is with us at all times and all places. That resurrection, God is working through us, whether we know it or not, bringing us into places of new life, causing us to do resurrection business, and living as a resurrection community. Yeah. That's our God. Oh, we come and we celebrate what God did on Easter. That God raised Jesus. And that God can do wonderful new life things with us in our world. That's why we come to gather here on the Easter celebration. We want to be that Easter community, that resurrection community. Yes, the news reported by Mary Magdalene was not anything that Jesus did, but it was God's action. She needed to say, I saw what God did. I saw the Lord. Look what God is doing in the midst of what we thought was the worst time of our lives. God is breaking through with something new. And Jesus is the way that God reveals to God's people the truth and the way of God. Jesus is the ultimate example of God's power over death. It is God who ushers Jesus into a new way of life and a new way of living. And Shelby Spahn says this is a being something new. He calls it our new being. When we live as resurrection people, we're not the usual folks. Sometimes we slide out of that resurrection people identity. We lose hope. We struggle. And that's part of life. But as Christians, we have to reach, even reclaim, hold again the truth that God has not spoken any words of giving up on us or life. The resurrection news that Mary Magdalene proclaims to the discipleship community is that God has created, through Jesus, a new worldview. Mary no longer sees the world as an environment restricted with an open, but she sees it as an open opportunity, a new harvest land, to be worked by planting the seeds of resurrection hope. Mary's news to the discipleship community is that when God is calling God's people to expand the vision of Jesus' message, the resurrection community has the power. It has the power to widen the view of Jesus' example. Jesus said that his community would do greater things than he would ever do. And how is that to be possible that we could do greater things than Jesus did? It's because we are the resurrection community with the vision, with the hope, with the word, with the message. But the truth is that death has not abandoned its cause. Even though we can stand here and proclaim death is not ever going to have the last word, that does not mean that the powers of death have abandoned the cause. They packed up their baggage and gone away. The powers of evil, the powers of death have not abandoned the cause. And this is a reason why the resurrection community has to be even stronger. The powers of death have not disappeared, but you see, they continue to be experienced in the smallest and grandest of scales. You can find the powers of death in poverty, You can find the powers of death and greed and racism and violence and all types of anything that would separate God's people from one another and from God. There are examples of the powers that claim minds and hearts. If you just go back last week. Last week, grand scale, what happened outside of Kansas City? Lord, how could it be that the powers of death, but they're so real, they claim this man's heart. They claimed this man's heart, and for years and years he carried out this white supremacy idea in his heart. He's a child of God. What happened to him? But the powers of death, they have not abandoned his cause, and Christians have to stand firm on the rock of redemption and salvation and resurrection to combat these powers that steal hearts from this poor man. I don't have any sympathy for what will happen to him through justice, but I feel bad for the way that his heart was claimed by the powers of death, and for some reason it penetrated his mind, and he thought that certain people were better than other people, that God's children were meant to be divided instead of united. It just went on and on and on and on. And where did he go? To a holy place, to a Jewish community center. And what did he do? He took the lives of 3 Christians. He's hoping to take the lives of 3 Jewish people, children of God. Because that's where the powers of death, they claim his heart, and these poor families now suffering, and they're gathering on this very day and this very hour, but they're reaching deep into the message of Easter. Because they know the same thing that you know, that death will not have the last word. This past week also, right? And tomorrow, we celebrate the 118th running of the Boston Marathon. And the running of the marathon in itself is one event. But tomorrow we will see millions of people gathering to celebrate life. Whether it's running 26.2 miles or it's saying no to the powers of death, to the powers of terrorism, to the powers of violence, to say we will come into the streets, we will celebrate life, we will stand with those that are victims, we will stand with those that lost limbs, we will stand with those who lost lives, we will say no to the powers of death, and they'll be on the streets from Hopkinton to downtown Boston, and they will be crying, good news, clapping, keep going, because life is important. And this is what the resurrection community does. We need to be on the streets, proclaiming the message, the resurrection news that life is a precious gift, and we need to do everything possible to enhance it so that all will have the fullness of life as God intended. Death, my brothers and sisters, will not have the final word. And that's the Easter message, my brothers and sisters. Death will not have the final word. You see, Easter is the Lord's Day, and Easter is celebrated every Sunday. Every Sunday. We don't have all the flowers and all the beautiful music, but Easter is celebrated every Sunday because Sunday is the day for the gathering of the resurrection community, and you all are official members. Whether you worship here regularly, once in a while, or you worship in another church, or you haven't found a church, you're welcome here. Find one. Be part of the resurrection community. You can't go wrong. The resurrection community is the gathering of God's people because it's a gathering that's fueled by the good news, the word that God has spoken to God's people through Jesus. The resurrection community is a gathering of people who may not have only heard the news, but want to be the news, right? Not only have you heard the news of the resurrection, you want to be the resurrection. And that's what's so exciting about being part of the resurrection community, that you can actually do things that come out of the hope of resurrection, that are fueled by that good news. I have seen the Lord, and I want to tell you about Him through my actions, my words, and my presence. And so how do we grow this resurrection community? We grow it by one person at a time. One person at a time comes forward, either as an infant or as a young adult or as an adult. They come forward and they are standing before the altar of God and say, I want to be part of this resurrection community. It's not the ordinary act. It's not like joining the AAA. It's not like joining the AARP. It's not like joining any other group. because we're a strange and determined group of people. We're a bunch of people who always proclaim to the world, you know what? Death does not have the last word. Well, you tell me about that in the face of this world. I'll tell you about Jesus in the empty tomb and how we are going to go forward and do whatever we can to minister to the hurting and suffering, the lost. We're not going to give up. We're going to go forward. And so one at a time, people come forward to join this resurrection community made up of new people all through this globe who have examined in some way, whether it's young or small or old or large, have examined that they have chains on their wrists, the chains of sin, and when they lift them up and they break them, they find themselves in a new place. To take those bonds off and to go forward in life. The resurrection community invites the opportunity. It invites the opportunity and the possibility to be the voice of Christ. To be the voice of Christ. And to call upon the Holy Spirit to bind yet one more to this bond. That's what we do. And we do it through the sacrament of baptism. Holy sacrament of baptism. One at a time, come forward to the waters, to the living waters. Whether brought by a parent or a godparent or a sponsor or presenting themselves as an adult or young adult, they come forward because they are proclaiming in their own way, I want to be part of this resurrection community. I want to be part of this Easter family. I want to be part of taking into the world this good news that Christ is alive. And so as we transition from hearing the Word and reflecting on the Word, we go now as friends into the Word to share this resurrection view. Let us prepare our hearts and minds as we celebrate the gift of new life through the holy covenant of baptism. This morning,